evening, everyone. My name is Hal Blumkin. We're coming to you from Comfortably Zone Radio Network. Ralph Tyko is unable to be with us tonight, so it's myself and our usual third party on these Tuesday nights, basically discussing old-time basketball, football, and hockey in New York, emphasizing on Madison Square Garden. But since Ralph isn't here tonight, and Hal just had his new book banned, published today, we're going to discuss the book. Welcome, Hal.
Thanks very much, Alan. We're very excited about the publication of the book. It's published by Diversion Press, and as you said, it came out today. It deals with baseball players, owners, managers, a team doctor in one case, who have been thrown out of baseball or suspended from baseball for long periods for one thing or another. It's kind of a humorous book because some of the misdemeanors that they were suspended for are kind of funny. So I had a great time researching it and a great time writing it, and I hope people will enjoy it.
Is George Steinbrenner in the book?
You betcha. George was suspended twice, so I mean,
know that. Yeah.
He may lead all owners in suspensions, you know.
Yeah,
he's in the book. There are a number of owners who were suspended over the years. Marge Schott with the Cincinnati Reds, Ted Turner with the Braves. All, one time or another ran afoul of organized baseball and got themselves suspended.
My nickname for Marge Schott was the Wicked Witch. That's what I used to call her. And
that's
so
pretty
you have
good.
William Cox, the owner of the Phillies, that was suspended for 1940.
Yes, he was. He was one of the first. I think he may have been the first. He's in the book as well.
Could you discuss, for the people who really aren't old enough to remember Steinbrenner's suspension, can you discuss those two suspensions a little bit?
Well, the first one came after he was found to have made illegal contributions to the Richard Nixon campaign, and Bowie Kuhn suspended him. He was the commissioner at the time. And George, he was suspended, but I just have suspicions about, he's only a telephone call away. So although he wasn't in the day-to-day operation of the team, certainly not on the scene at Yankee Stadium, I believe in my heart of hearts that he still had a lot of input on what went on with the Yankees. Gabe Paul, who was one of the great baseball executives, took over the running of the team day to day, and all of a sudden the Yankees became American League champions in 1976. So Gabe was doing something right, 1976, 77, and 78. And so Gabe was doing something right. And then Steinbrenner got in trouble again. He signed Dave Winfield, who was a marquee free agent at the time, later wound up in the Hall of Fame, and deservedly so. And Winfield had issues here in New York. He didn't always hit, certainly not in the postseason. And this angered George. George termed him Mr. May in comparison to the great Reggie Jackson, who was Mr. October. And so they were in a kind of a feud. And George foolishly recruited a small-time gambler named Howard Siner.
Howard Spira.
I'm sorry, Howard Spira, you're right.
Yeah.
To gather some dirt on Winfield so that George would not have to pay part of his contract. It had to do with the Winfield Foundation. And that was frowned upon by Fay Vincent, who was at that time the commissioner. And so he banned George from baseball again. And George sat out a couple of years and then came back. So he leads all owners in suspensions with 2.
Wow, and Ted Turner was suspended for, the Channel 17 on the back of
decided he was going to manage the team.
Yeah, he managed him for 1 day. I know that, yeah.
Yeah, he fired Dave Bristol and got into uniform and into the dugout. And, that was kind of like almost like a sideshow. He had turned the Braves into something of a sideshow. and so he was suspended for a while as a result.
And one of the interesting ones, I thought, was the one from the 1920s where the Giants coach named Cozy Dolan and a player named Jimmy O'Connell were banned by Landis for, supposedly offering money to a Phillies player to throw games.
That was a strange one.
Yeah.
Because there was speculation that it was done as a joke, and that Frank Frisch, the Giants' great second baseman, and a couple of other players had kind of ganged up and decided to play this gag on a young player, actually, who was convinced to go and try and get an old friend on the Phillies to throw a game. And his friend squealed. And when the word came out that he had been approached by a Giants player, and the coach was Cozy Dolan, you're right, that led to another suspension. So stuff like that is sprinkled throughout the book. It's strange doings. We talked a week or so ago about Ray Fisher, who was a pitcher, and he resisted a cut in contract. Cincinnati Reds wanted to cut his contract, and in those days we're talking about maybe $1,000, but that was a lot of money.
Yeah, it was a lot of money.
So he resisted, and he started to talk to Branch Rickey, who at that time was with the Cardinals, and Rickey had connections in college baseball. And Fisher said, I thought about coaching college baseball. And so Rickey said, well, you call these people at the University of Michigan, and they'll, And so he did. Fisher did. And they talked for a while, and there was nothing done about it, but they said, if you're interested, you call us back. Fisher shows up in the office of the Cincinnati Reds, the president of the Reds at the time, and sits down and he starts negotiating contract. And the Reds are standing fast on this salary cut. Fisher puts his feet up on the desk of the president, which is something you don't ordinarily do, picks up the telephone and calls the University of Michigan from the president's office of the Reds and says, I'll take the job. And he was immediately suspended by Major League Baseball, but became a beloved coach at the University of Michigan for many, many years. And I believe he's in their Hall of Fame. So do you suspend a guy for taking another job? I don't know.
I know Rickey and Landis did not particularly care for each other.
No, that's true.
And they freed in, I think it was 1938 or somewhere around there, where Landis, who hated the farm system, freed a whole bunch of Cardinal farmhands. The only one, of course, that really amounted to anything was Pete Reiser.
That's right.
Right.
Rickey was the father of the farm systems.
Yeah, Landis hated the farm system, and Rickey had such a string of farm teams. There were a couple of lower class minor leagues that he had almost every team in the league.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm sure you have the 1947 DeRocha suspension in there.
Oh, sure. He's. I'm just reading a wonderful book written by a friend of mine named Paul Dixon.
Yeah, well, I have that on pre-order. Yeah.
Oh, it's wonderful. It really is. I'm about halfway through it right now. And DeRocha was always in trouble. I mean, he was always in trouble. And finally, baseball had enough of it in 1947. He had been hanging out with George Raft and the Hollywood crowd, and he was gambling, and he was doing all kinds of stuff. And finally, Happy Chandler just came down on him and said, you're out. And he sat out the 1947 season, which was a momentous season for the Dodgers, because it was the year that Jackie Robinson broke the color ban in baseball. So it was a very important year in the history of the Brooklyn Dodgers, and in the history of baseball for that matter. And Leo was
really ironic about that is that DeRocha came back in 1948, and from what I read, he got into nasty fight with Branch Rickey because the Dodgers had no catching. Hodges had been shifted to first base, and the primary catcher in 47, Bruce Edwards, couldn't throw the ball. And DeRosa wanted Campanella, and Rickey used Campanella to break the coal line in the AAA American Association.
Mm-hmm.
And the Dodgers underperformed for most of 48, and when Herb Stone decided to fire Mel out from the Giants, he asked Rickey if he could talk to Bert Shotton, who was DeRosa's replacement in 1947, and Rickey said to him, says, "You can have DeRosa." And I was too young when that happened. I was 5 years old, but I can just imagine the craziness of DeRosa going from managing the Dodgers for about 10 years to managing the Giants, who was at that time was their biggest and most hated rival.
Well, I'll tell you, I was 9 years old, and I was a big Giants fan, and it broke my heart. I couldn't imagine this. This hated guy from the Brooklyn Dodgers was now going to manage my team. It was outrageous. I remember distinctly sitting on a curb, tears rolling down my face at the thought of this hated Brooklyn Dodger guy who was now going to manage the New York Giants. But, of course, it turned out all right for the Giants because they won the pennant in 51 and again in 54 with Leo.
Yeah, well, the story I read was they asked him, because they had all these lead-footed sluggers, and when Stone called him in and says, "What do you think of the team as we have it now?" He said, "Back the truck up." And the only two position players that he kept were Bobby Thompson and Whitey Lockman. And then they made the trade after 1949, which sent Sid Gordon, Willard Marshall, and Buddy Curt to the Boston Braves for Alvin Dark and Eddie Stanky. And that trade basically turned them into a contender, and ironically started the downfall of the Braves in Boston.
You're right about that. But those Giants of 1947 hit 221 home runs, set a record at the time. So you're right; they were lead-footed sluggers, but they were perpetually in the second division, fifth-place team, and Leo made them over into his own image of a slick, defensive-minded, fast on the bases, and it worked out. And you mentioned Lockman and Thompson. There was also a significant addition in 1951, a guy named Willie Mays.
Yeah, well, they also had brought up Monty Irvin the year before,
that's
and
right.
He put Magley in the rotation in 1950 out of desperation. And Magley was 33 years old, spent the previous few years in the Mexican League. He jumped
Lockman
the Giants.
Was in the outfield. Lockman was a left fielder, and Monty Irvin was the first baseman. And Leo swapped them. He moved Lockman to first base and Monty to the outfield, where he played next to Willie Mays. And Monty was kind of like a father figure for Willie.
Yeah, Bobby Thompson was the center fielder before Mays came up.
That's correct. You're right.
And
then Bobby became the third baseman.
Hank Thompson was having major personal problems that season. They put Bobby Thompson at third base.
That's right. That's right. But Henry Thompson was a valuable guy off the bench for them as well.
Yeah.
So I remember that team like inside and out. I could tell you all the numbers, even the uniform numbers. I love that.
The first year I followed was 1951. I was 8. That was some year between the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Giants had each other's throats for in that season. And it was
the Giants won 37 of their last 44 games to wipe out a 13.5 game deficit and force the playoff. And everybody knows what happened in the playoff when Bobby Thompson hit the home run in the ninth inning.
Well, Charlie Dresden. I'm not a big fan of Charlie Dresden. I think he was an awful manager, and I think they won in 1952 and 53 despite him, not because of him. And he wrecked his relief pitching to the point where he had to start Columbia in the second game of that playoff series, and at the end of the third game, he had Branca and Erskine, both of whom were starters, warming up in the bullpen when Newcomb started to get into trouble, and they brought in Branca, and Branca had given up a home run to Bobby Thompson the first game of that playoff.
Branca, who just passed away a couple of months ago, told me that Dressen just overworked him down the stretch. He was like in every other game. He was coming in every other game and starting every other game, and he just didn't have anything left. Something like Aroldis Chapman for Cleveland for Chicago in the World Series last year, where he was throwing on fumes at the end.
They had a relief pitcher named Clyde King who was very effective until about August, and then he was so overworked that he couldn't do anything the last 2 months. But the biggest thing I have about Dressen is the way he ruined Joe Black.
Well,
Joe Black had that sensational rookie year in 1952. I've read this in a couple of sources, including a book that was published in 1953 about all the early black players that followed Mays. And the chapter on Joe Black said, after they're discussing Black's 52 season, that Dressen said, well, he has to learn a new pitch. And he just screwed up his motion so much that he was never able to recover it and was essentially very ineffective for the rest of his major league career.
Yeah, a nice man also. I met Joe Black after he retired, and he was a really sweetheart of a guy. That era of players, I thought, and I over the years, over my career, I had an opportunity to talk to quite a few of them. They were really decent, kind, nice guys, and it's funny because the era of baseball that I do a lot of writing about, which is the dead ball era, and as I told you, in my new book, Banned, a lot of the early years, those players were not nice people. I mean, they were like the underbelly of society. They go forever getting into trouble, and that's what helped get all these players suspended. I had one player in the book. One of my favorite stories in the book. There was an outfielder named Benny Kauff.
Oh yeah,
Kauff.
Yeah, high cover the Feds. Yeah.
He was a great star in the Federal League.
Yeah.
And he was full of himself. I mean, he thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And he was a productive player, but he also was involved in a stolen car ring, which is not a nice thing to do. And Judge Landis, although he was found innocent in the trial, Judge Landis said, "You're out, goodbye," and he was out of baseball. And stuff like that went on all the time. One of my favorite stories in the book, Dr. Joseph Kramer. You know who Dr. Joseph Kramer was?
That one I'm not aware of.
Well, I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
Dr. Kramer was the team physician for the New York Giants in 1908. And 1908 was the year of the Merkel-Boner. And they forced a playoff game between the Cubs and the Giants. And it was a raucous scene at the Polo Grounds. I mean, the place was jammed. There were fans spilling out into the streets, and there was ugliness on the pregame and warm-ups because these two teams hated each other anyway. And Dr. Kramer confronted Bill Clem, the great Bill Clem, the umpire, and he offered him a bribe to throw the game, make sure the Giants win. And Bill Clem was having none of that. So he reported the bribe, and Dr. Kramer is the only team physician ever to be suspended from baseball. He's in band. So that was what made this a fun book to write. Stuff like that, stories like that. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and there was one that I have a book that came out a whole bunch of years ago, and I think it was called Last Round for the Shuffler, about Phil Douglas.
Oh yeah, Shuffler.
Yeah, from what I understand, he got along pretty well with the bottle.
Yeah, he was an alcoholic.
Yeah,
it drove John McGraw crazy, and McGraw kept suspending him. He'd take money from him, and finally Douglas got fed up, and he decided he was going to get even, and he wrote a letter to a friend of his on another team, I think the Cardinals, and he said, I don't want McGraw to win, so I'm going to get lost. I could get lost. I could go off on a vacation if you pay me a few bucks. And, of course, this letter found its way to the commissioner's office, and Phil Douglas was suspended. So, that was not a clever thing for him to do, to write a letter like that.
Nobody would accuse a lot of these guys back then of actually being Einsteins.
No, you're right. Another one, Hal Chase. You know Hal Chase?
Oh yeah. He was notorious.
He was notorious. Exactly. That's the best word for him. He was notorious. Yeah. First of all, he loved the big city. He played for the Yankees for a while, and he loved the Broadway scene, and he was very happy to be in New York. And he was also he was a terrific fielder. He was believed to be the best fielding first baseman of his time. But somehow he led the league in errors. Now, how is that possible? Well, he took bribes, and he also bribed other players. And he was continuously in trouble with the authorities, and finally just, drifted off. But he took other players with him. You were traded to his team, and he'd immediately confront you and say, hey, well, let's do some business here. So Hal Chase was a notorious gambler and fixer of games. And he's in the book, too.
Yeah, I don't know, did you do anything in the minor leagues? Because I know there was a huge scandal, I think in the late teens or early 20s in the Pacific Coast League where 3 or 4 players were banned.
That I didn't know. No, I never came across that one.
So
I didn't know that.
And can you discuss, I know William Cox, no relation to the Dodger third baseman of the same name.
Right.
The
owner of the Phillies.
He bought them from Nugent,
Gary Nugent, that's right.
Who had some of the worst teams in the history of baseball, and would get rid of, anytime they got anybody halfway decent, they would get rid of them because he needed the money to operate. So he sold it to this William Cox, and he only lasted a year.
Well, Cox was a notorious bettor also. He would forever bet on his team or bet against his team. And finally, he had Bucky Harris as his manager, and he fired him. And Harris, to get even, made it clear to the authorities that this guy was betting on the team. And that didn't go over very well, so he got himself thrown out of baseball. He surfaced later in soccer, William Cox. And he was a racehorse owner as well, I think.
Yeah, the Cardinals had the owner right before Anheuser-Busch named Fred Sy.
Yep.
Who was
He's in the book too.
Victim of income tax evasion.
Exactly. He's in the book as well.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of bad guys,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and, I don't want to really get into Pete Rose because there's, still constant debates on Pete Rose. And my take on this is that, he wouldn't have signed that paper if if they'd have the goods on him, and any chance that he might have had of reinstatement, he stonewalled for forever. And he just did it all to himself, and he, as much as a genius as he was on the field, the rest of his life he did not handle very well.
No, well, he did time for income tax evasion.
Yeah, I think a few of them did that because of they weren't declaring some of the money they got doing card shows as income.
Exactly. Yeah. There's an awful lot of dirty laundry out there,
Do you get into any of the...
I uncovered some of it, but I'm sure not all of it.
Do you get into any of the drug scandals of, back in Vita
Yes,
Blue?
I did. Steve Howe, the great relief pitcher, he was suspended 7 times for drug violations. Now, that's tough to do, 7 times.
When he died in a one-car crash, they found
they found meth in his system. Yeah,
I remember watching a game when he was with the Yankees, and they were playing the Milwaukee Brewers. It was back in the old days when the Brewers were in the AL, and he threw over to third. He was called for balking on a throw over to third base. Claiming the run had tagged up too soon. They called a balk, and the run came in. And one of my friends said to me, he says he probably heard a vendor yelling "Coke" here. But this guy was, if it was back in the days where there was no union, this guy would have been kicked out long before that.
One of my favorite suspensions, although he's not in the book, but I do remember it when it happened. Joe Niekro, who was the brother of the great Hall of Fame pitcher Phil Niekro.
Yeah.
Joe Niekro is on the mound, and he's accused of scuffing the ball. And they go and they're going to search him on the mound, and a nail file fell out of his pocket?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, You got to be better than that if you're going to cheat. So he got himself suspended for a while. But there's all kinds of stuff like that in the history of baseball.
And Bert Campaneris for, I think it was a 72 LCS for throwing his bat.
That's Bert Campaneris.
Bert Campaneris. I think it was Byron LeGros was the pitcher.
The great Whitey Ford, Hall of Fame pitcher Whitey Ford, used to used to throw the ball to Elston Howard, who was his catcher, and Howard would scuff the ball on his belt buckle so that Ford would have an advantage throwing the ball. Those things went on. There's all kinds of cheating, and it's probably still going on. I don't know. I mean, I'm not that privy to the information.
Before they outlawed in 1920, before they outlawed the spitball and the Emery ball and some of these other things that they were using.
Sure.
That ball era, I think they grandfathered a bunch of pitchers who were throwing a spitball at that time. And Roy Grimes is the legal one. And they all, Lou Burdette was always accused. Preachereau was always accused. Gaylord, Perry was accused of using everything under the sun on his, on the baseball.
He wrote a book, Me and the Spitter.
Yeah.
Gaylord Perry.
Preachereau came out with an article in the early days of Sports Illustrated a few months after he had retired, saying that he had used it at time, and the old saying that it ain't cheating unless you get caught.
That's right.
The cork bats, and look, it reflects society.
A major part of my book, a lot of the suspensions came in the 1920s, and that was a result of Mountain Landis, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, being hired as commissioner to clean up the game after the Black Sox scandal. So Landis just went wild. I mean, the slightest thing that you did wrong and you were out. He was a tough commissioner. And one of the examples, one of the clean players on the Chicago White Sox team that threw the World Series in 1919 was a pitcher named Dickie Kerr. He was a rookie at the time. And he was the only pitcher who won games for the White Sox in that World Series.
Yeah.
He won a game, but Dickie Kerr was clean.
Yeah,
he won 2 games. That's right, and he was okay until he ran afoul of contract negotiations, and they threw him out of baseball. He was the clean White Sox player, and they threw him out of baseball. So he wound up years later as a manager in the minor leagues, in the rookie leagues, and he had a player who was a pitcher. And this player hurt his arm, fell on his arm. He was a left-hander. And it looked like his career was over. And Dickie Kerr said to him, you're a pretty good hitter. Why don't we try you at a different position? And they made Stan Musial into an outfielder. And he was responsible for saving Stan Musial's career. So that story is in the book as well.
Yeah,
and stuff like this just fascinates me.
That would be pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll say. Hall of Fame player. And Musial was always thankful that Kerr had stepped in, and because Musial was ready to go home to Donora, Pennsylvania, and call it quits. And Dickie Kerr said, "No, let's try this. I think you can do this."
Yeah, the reason
he saved his career.
Even though playing wise he was on a level with Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio, the reason that he's essentially shunted into the background is because he didn't have a volatile personality like Williams or a standoffish personality like DiMaggio.
That's true. That's true.
So I mean,
he loved to play the harmonica. He used to play the harmonica.
Nobody I know ever had a bad word to say about Stan Musial.
No, he was a good man, nice man.
So he wasn't controversial. It's interesting that before the baseball books became a huge industry, that the only player that had substantial biographies that was not a volatile or excessive like a Cobb or Ruth or was Lou Gehrig, and the only reason he got that much space is because of the way in which he got ill and passed away.
Right, the tragic end.
But I guess those days they decided there wasn't going to be any money in writing about Honus Wagner or Stan Musial or somebody who really didn't create controversy.
You know, Alan, the squeaky wheel always gets the oil, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and did you get into the Cobb speaker thing in 1926?
No, I did not. I was aware of it, and I don't know, for some reason I did not write it. One of my favorite stories, you mentioned Cobb. In 1910, he was involved in a batting race with Napoleon Lajoie.
Yeah.
And what made this significant was that the Chalmers Automobile Company was going to give a car to the leading hitter in the major leagues that season. Was it whether it was the American League or the National League, didn't matter. They were going to get a car. And Cobb was widely despised by his own teammates and all around the league. So now we go into the last days of the season. Cobb is sitting out because he's got his average is pretty high, and he's got a problem with his eyes. He said he had an eye infection or something. And Lajoie is playing a doubleheader with Cleveland against the St. Louis Browns. The St. Louis Browns were god-awful, all right? And the manager of the Browns was a guy named John O'Connor, and his nickname was Peach Pie, which I was really intrigued by. So now Peach Pie O'Connor hated Cobb, just like everybody else did, and he decided that Lajoie was going to win the batting championship, and he was going to see to it. And the way he would do that is he instructed his third baseman, Red Corridon, to play back every time Lajoie comes up. Play back. Play on the lip of the outfield grass, because this guy hits line drives, he'll knock you down. So Corridon, who was a rookie, said, okay, I'll play where you tell me to play. And what it was an invitation to Lajoie to bunt. Well, the first time up, Lajoie ignored it, and he just hit a fly ball, and they misplayed it, and it was a triple. And then after that, Lajoie looks down at third base. Every time he comes up, Red Corridon is playing out, way deep out, almost in the outfield. So he just starts laying down bunts, and he bunted for six base hits with bunts. Wow. And he overtook Cobb for the batting championship. Well, there was a lot of controversy about it, because in those days statistics weren't kept quite as diligently as they are today. And they decided that Cobb actually had won the batting championship.
Yeah.
Well, it wound up that Chalmers gave a car to each of them. The Chalmers Automobile Company gave a car to each of them. But Peach Pie O'Connor and his coach, Harry Howell, there was a play, by the way, there was one play where Lajoie bunted, and it was misplayed, and it was ruled an error. And they sent, Peach Pie sent up a message to the official scorer, change it to a hit, and you'll get a suit of clothes. That's how much he wanted Lajoie to win that batting title.
Wow. And
the official scorer said, I'm not changing it. It's an error. I saw it. I call it as I see it, is the way Bill Clem once said, right?
Yeah.
And so he refused to change it. But as a result of all of this, both Peach Pie O'Connor and his coach, Handsome Harry Howell, not the hockey player, but he was a coach, both got themselves suspended from baseball by Judge Landis. So not by Judge Landis, by the American League president at the time.
Dan Johnson.
All of this is in the book, and it's just fascinating anecdotal
one last
stuff.
One before we close. About the Cobb one-game suspension in 1912 after he beat up a fan in the stands.
Yes.
the whole team struck, and they had to bring in, basically high school kids to play against the AIDS for one day. Can you go into that a little bit?
I did not in the book, but that's a famous episode in baseball history. The Tigers players refused to play because their star had been suspended, and you just said it. They brought in all kinds of amateurs and people that they found, Sandlot people, and there's a pitcher, Aloysius. His name was Aloysius something, I forget.
Travis.
Okay, there you go. Right, he's in the record book.
Yeah.
With the most runs given up in a 9-inning game, because he was the only pitcher they had, and he was out there for 9 innings, and he gave up a ton of runs. He's in the baseball record book, and even today. So that's a famous episode. I did not get into that story, but it's a famous story.
Well, Hal, I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm sure it's going to do very well, and as you said, there's a lot of humor in these situations in some cases. And I want to thank you, and again, I hope the book does extremely well, and I'm proud to have you on this program.
Thanks, Alan. I appreciate it, and I enjoy doing it with you.
Okay, so we'll be back next Tuesday. Hopefully Ralph's voice will clear up by then, and we'll get into whatever we decide to at that point. Thank you very much. Good night.